The traveller removed his hat, shaking off the mist, and stepped into the tavern's dim light. The room smelled faintly of smoke, ale, and something metallic, like blood masked by perfume. Two women stood behind the counter, their faces illuminated by the flickering lanterns. They greeted him warmly, yet their voices seemed rehearsed, as though they'd repeated the same welcome countless times before. He took a seat near the fire, trying to ignore the chill creeping up his spine. The flames danced, but they gave no warmth, and the other patrons avoided eye contact, sipping their drinks in silence, too heavy for comfort. He glanced around. The tavern walls were lined with old paintings of ships and storms, their frames slightly tilted as if disturbed by unseen hands. A lone fiddler played in the corner, his bow scraping across the strings with an odd rhythm that didn't match any known melody. The traveller's eyes met those of a man seated by the window, pale, trembling, his cup untouched. Before he could ask, the man vanished when the traveller blinked. He rubbed his eyes, convincing himself it was exhaustion, yet the empty chair told a different story. The sisters approached with a tray. "Our finest brew," one said, her grin almost too wide. The liquid shimmered faintly, catching the light like oil on water. The traveller hesitated but lifted the cup, the scent both sweet and sour. "It warms the soul," whispered the other sister, her gaze unblinking. The first sip burned, not from heat but from something deeper, something wrong. He felt his heartbeat quicken, his vision blur for a second. The laughter around him grew louder, echoing strangely, as if from far away. Trying to steady himself, he set the cup down and looked at the marks on the wooden table. Tiny etchings, symbols that resembled circles and eyes. He reached out to trace one when a sudden chill passed through him. A voice, soft and melodic, murmured his name, though he hadn't told anyone what it was. He turned sharply, but no one stood behind him. The sisters continued serving, their movements perfectly synchronized, too perfect, as though practiced in front of a mirror for eternity. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Inside, time seemed to stretch. The traveller tried to ask a nearby man how long he had been there, but the man's face was blank, his lips moving without sound. A second later he was gone too. Only his cup remained, dripping slowly onto the floor. Panic swelled in the traveller's chest, yet no one else seemed to notice. The fiddler kept playing, his tune now dissonant, broken, like a cry for help from another world. When he rose to leave, the door wouldn't budge. It was as though the wood had fused with the frame. The sisters approached again, offering him another drink. "You look pale, dear," one said softly. "Just one more to steady your nerves." He refused, his voice trembling, but their smiles didn't fade. The lanterns dimmed suddenly, shadows deepening across the room. For a moment he thought he saw hands, dozens of them, reaching from the floorboards, grasping at his boots before vanishing again. Desperation set in. He pounded on the walls, calling for help, but the sound seemed to die before reaching anyone outside. The laughter returned, now distorted, layered with whispers that echoed his name. "Drink and stay," the voices said. He backed away, heart racing, stumbling over a loose plank that revealed something glimmering beneath. A ring, still attached to a skeletal hand. His scream caught in his throat as the sisters watched silently, their eyes glowing faintly in the lantern's dying light. He stumbled toward the staircase, hoping for another exit. Each step creaked, echoing through the emptiness above. A faint glow came from one of the upstairs rooms. He approached it trembling and saw rows of empty cups neatly arranged on a shelf, each engraved with a different name. The last cup was still wet, freshly placed. As he read the name etched on its surface, his stomach turned to ice. It was his own. The door slammed shut behind him. Lydia Tinsley moved like a ghost behind the bar, her every gesture deliberate, graceful, almost hypnotic. Her hands never trembled, no matter how close the lantern flames flickered against her pale skin. The townsfolk said she could pour ale smoother than any man, yet those who drank from her cups often vanished before dawn. Her sister, Margaret, rarely appeared in the common room. She lingered upstairs, tending to the guest rooms with a care that felt ritualistic rather than hospitable. The few travelers who stayed overnight swore they heard her humming through the walls, a tune that followed them into their dreams. The sisters' beauty was undeniable, but there was something wrong about it. Too perfect, too preserved. Lydia's eyes, a deep shade of green, seemed to watch and measure every movement. Margaret's face, glimpsed only in candlelight, carried no wrinkles, no trace of exhaustion, though decades had supposedly passed since the tavern first opened. The villagers whispered that the Tinsley sisters had been running the place since before their grandparents were born. Some even claimed to have seen portraits of them in old family homes, unchanged through generations. Those who dared to ask about their past found the sisters' charm quickly turn cold. Questions about their parents, their origin, or how they came to own the tavern would end conversations in silence. The next day, the curious ones often left town without a word, or never left at all. The constable once investigated these disappearances, but he too stopped coming after visiting the tavern. From then on, no one spoke of the Tinsleys unless in hushed tones, and even then, only after dark. Margaret was known to appear suddenly behind guests, her footsteps eerily silent. She would offer clean towels and a soft smile, yet her eyes never matched the warmth of her words. Some claimed her reflection didn't always move with her in the mirror's glass. Lydia, meanwhile, kept a ledger under the bar, a small black book where she noted every guest's name in perfect, elegant handwriting. Strangely, the ink never faded even after years, as if the book absorbed more than words. The traveler, still shaken from his first night, watched them carefully. Lydia's movements were mesmerizing, yet every time she smiled, his stomach tightened. He noticed the other patrons' fear, masked behind laughter, their hands trembling when she passed by. When Margaret descended from upstairs, the tavern's noise always dimmed. The fire crackled lower, the fiddler paused, and even the air seemed to wait for her to move again. It was as though the tavern itself breathed in rhythm with the sisters. Late one evening, the traveler caught a glimpse of Margaret through a half-open door. She wasn't cleaning or preparing a room. She was kneeling beside a trunk, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. Candles surrounded her in a circle, their flames burning blue. For a moment, he thought he saw movement inside the trunk, something shifting, alive. But when he blinked, it was gone, and Margaret turned toward him, her eyes sharper than blades. He backed away before she spoke a word. The townsfolk avoided the tavern after sunset, yet they never spoke of closing it. "Better the devil you know," one old man said. "As long as it stands, maybe the darkness stays there." Lydia and Margaret continued their nightly routines, flawless as ever. Their laughter rang hollow through the fog, echoing beyond the tavern walls. The traveler could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on that place, as though every brick and board remembered the screams it had absorbed. That night, he dreamt of the sisters standing over him, their faces expressionless, holding silver cups filled to the brim. "To your memory," Lydia whispered before forcing the drink to his lips. He awoke drenched in sweat, his throat burning with the taste of iron. From downstairs came the faint sound of humming. Margaret's voice, low and mournful, singing the same tune he'd heard through the walls. The sun had not yet risen, but the tavern was already awake, waiting. It happened quietly, so quietly that no one at first realized a man was gone. The fiddler played, laughter rolled across the smoky air, and Lydia moved behind the bar like a serpent gliding through water. But the traveler noticed the empty chair. The man who had been sitting there, a merchant from St. Louis, was gone, leaving behind a half-finished mug of ale. The foam still clung to the rim, untouched for minutes that felt like hours. No one mentioned it. No one even looked at the empty seat. It was as if he had never existed. The traveler tried to ask the barkeep about him, but Lydia's smile stopped him cold. Her eyes met his for a fraction too long, and in that silence, he understood. She already knew. People come and go, she said softly, polishing a glass that didn't need cleaning. This town is not for everyone. Her voice carried a melody beneath it, like a lullaby twisted into something wrong. The traveler's mouth went dry as he watched her pour another drink from the same jug the merchant had sipped from. As the night deepened, a strange scent began to fill the room. At first it was faint, sweet and metallic, but it grew heavier, clinging to the air like invisible smoke. The traveler recognized it. Blood. No one else seemed to notice. They laughed, clinked glasses and sang louder, as if the noise could drown out the truth pressing against the tavern walls. He glanced around and saw something shift in the corner, a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. It pulsed, breathing with the rhythm of the room. When he went upstairs later, curiosity gnawed at him. The corridor stretched longer than before, the air colder. One door, slightly ajar, let out a faint creaking sound. Inside, he saw footprints, bare, wet, and leading nowhere. A whisper came from within the walls, a voice calling a name he didn't recognize. Thomas, it breathed again and again until the traveler backed away, his heart hammering. The floorboards beneath him groaned, as if under invisible weight. Downstairs, Lydia and Margaret moved in perfect harmony, their faces calm, their steps soundless. The traveler watched as Lydia cleaned the merchant's table, pouring the remaining ale into a silver basin. Margaret carried it upstairs, her expression blank. When she returned, the basin was empty, but her hands glistened faintly in the candlelight, as though the liquid she carried had never been ale at all. The traveler tried to shake the thought, but the scent of iron grew thicker. The next morning, the merchant's horse was found still tied outside, its reins frozen stiff with dew. No one claimed it. When asked, Lydia shrugged. Perhaps he left at dawn, she said, her tone flat, but the traveler noticed her sleeves were damp, and beneath her fingernails a faint trace of red. He wanted to leave, but something stronger than fear held him there. An unseen force, like the tavern itself, refused to let him go. By the second night, the laughter felt forced. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. The traveler caught glimpses of faces in the mirror behind the bar, faces that didn't match the living guests. One, pale and trembling, mouthed words he couldn't hear before vanishing into the glass. The sisters continued to serve as if nothing were amiss, their movements eerily synchronized, like dancers in a play performed for no audience. That night, as he tried to sleep, the traveler heard footsteps pacing above his room. They were slow, deliberate, circling again and again. When he finally gathered the courage to look outside, he saw the merchant's empty chair still by the fire, a cup waiting for a hand that would never return. And from somewhere deep within the tavern came the faint echo of laughter, low, distorted, and followed by a whisper that froze his blood. One down. The traveler's hands trembled as he followed the faint draft coming from behind the bar. One loose plank creaked beneath his boot, revealing a narrow gap. When he pried it open, the stale air that escaped carried a stench of rot and dampness. A stairway spiraled downward into the dark. Every instinct screamed for him to stop, yet something stronger, a mix of dread and fascination, pulled him in. With each step, the laughter from the tavern above grew fainter, replaced by the steady dripping of unseen water and the low hum of something alive below. The cellar was vast, far larger than the building above could ever hold. The traveler's lantern cast long shadows that twisted unnaturally across the stone walls. Strange symbols were carved into the surface, circles, runes, and faces that seemed to shift when looked at too long. The floor was sticky, as though soaked with something that refused to dry. A dozen bottles lined the shelves, their contents glowing faintly green in the dim light. The air vibrated with whispers, too soft to understand, yet unmistakably human. He reached for one of the bottles. Inside, something moved, a wisp of vapor, swirling like smoke trapped in glass. When he held it closer, the vapor shaped itself into a face, silent and screaming. The traveler dropped it, and the bottle shattered, releasing a cold gust that extinguished his lantern for a heartbeat. When the flame flickered back, he saw movement at the far end of the cellar, a shape in white gliding silently between the pillars. His breath caught. It was Margaret holding a candle. She did not seem surprised to see him. "Curiosity," she said softly, her voice echoing like water through stone. "It's what brings them all here." Her candlelight illuminated an old altar, blackened by time. Upon it lay a leather-bound book, the Sisters' Journal. The traveler approached cautiously. Margaret did not stop him. She only watched. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. The journal detailed a trial. Lydia and Margaret Tinsley, accused of witchcraft in 1841, burned and drowned in the river. Yet here they were, unchanged, alive. The final entry read, "The river took our breath but gave us eternity." The journal spoke of rituals, of spirits bound in liquid form, souls distilled, preserved, and consumed. The tavern's ale, it explained, was their conduit. Every sip bound the drinker to the sisters, body and soul, until only the shell remained. The traveler's stomach churned as he remembered the merchant's empty chair. He staggered backward, realizing that every patron upstairs was unknowingly drinking their own damnation. From behind him came the sound of chains dragging. Lydia appeared now, her gown torn and stained with something dark. "You weren't meant to see this," she said calmly, her tone neither angry nor surprised. "But perhaps it's fate. Every story needs a witness." She ran her hand along the altar, tracing the symbols. The cellar pulsed faintly in rhythm with her touch, as if the very stone were alive and breathing with her. The traveler tried to flee, but the stairs seemed farther away than before. The air thickened, pressing against his chest like invisible hands. Bottles began to rattle on their shelves, one by one cracking open as faint, mournful voices filled the air. "Stay," Margaret whispered. "You've already drunk." The words froze his blood. He remembered the cup Lydia had poured for him earlier, the one he hadn't finished. His lips still tingled with its bitter taste. As he stumbled toward the exit, his lantern flickered wildly. The last thing he saw before the darkness swallowed him was the sisters standing together before the altar, smiling faintly as the whispers grew louder. Then silence, deep and consuming. Upstairs, the tavern carried on as usual. The fire crackled, the glasses clinked, and no one noticed that one more traveler had joined the cellar's collection of secrets. The traveler awoke in his room, heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. The faint echo of whispers still lingered in his ears. He rushed to the window, hoping to see dawn, but outside, the fog remained thick and unmoving, as if time itself had frozen. Every corner of the tavern seemed to pulse faintly with life, the walls breathing, the wood groaning under a presence unseen. He stumbled toward the door, but his reflection in the mirror stopped him cold. For a split second, the face staring back was not his own. It was pale, hollow-eyed, and whispering something soundless. He ran downstairs. The tavern was full again, laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint hum of a violin. But the faces were all wrong. The same people who had been there the night before sat in the same positions, repeating the same movements, their smiles eerily identical. Lydia glanced up from behind the bar, her eyes glinting. "Rough night, traveler?" she asked softly. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a dry rasp. Around him, the laughter grew louder, mechanical, like a record stuck on a single note. He sat at the bar, trying to think. His mind raced through what he had read in the journal, the mention of a binding brew, a drink that carried not warmth, but a spell of possession. Every soul who drank it became a fragment of the sisters' immortality. That was the secret to their youth. The tavern itself was their vessel, the physical form of their curse. Each time the clock struck midnight, the building fed on its guests, consuming their essence while their bodies remained, reanimated by the sisters' will. Suddenly, a patron beside him began to fade. It started subtly, the edges of his body dissolving like smoke. The man didn't even notice. He raised his glass to his lips, smiling as if nothing were wrong. The traveler backed away, horrified, watching as the man's laughter became faint, hollow, and finally disappeared altogether. The empty glass clinked softly against the counter, and Lydia's smile deepened. "One less," she whispered. "One more for us." The traveler realized then that the curse wasn't confined to the tavern's walls. It extended into the town itself. Every building, every road, every face seemed connected. Those who entered the tavern became part of its cycle, and those who lived nearby were already ensnared by its shadow. The fog outside wasn't natural. It was the tavern's breath, holding the town in perpetual dusk. He thought of running, but where could he go if the entire town was a living extension of their curse? He needed to act. He slipped back into the cellar, clutching the torn pages he had stolen from the sisters' journal. The ritual could be reversed, but it required something the sisters feared: fire. Only through destruction of the tavern's heart, hidden deep beneath the floorboards, could the curse be broken. But the pages were incomplete, and the words in the ancient script twisted before his eyes, as if resisting comprehension. Somewhere behind him, the faint echo of footsteps followed. "Going somewhere?" Margaret's voice cut through the darkness. Smooth and calm, she stepped into view, her gown untouched by dust. "You can't end what you've already joined." She reached out, and the air around the traveler grew heavy. He felt something crawling beneath his skin, like invisible roots digging into his veins. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Lydia appeared beside her sister, holding a single glass of ale. "Finish your drink," she said. "You'll understand everything." The traveler lunged backward, knocking over shelves of bottles that shattered with a chorus of shrieks. The cellar erupted in a storm of wind and whispering voices. He stumbled toward the hidden stairway, clutching a shard of glass like a weapon. Above him, the tavern shook as if alive, the laughter of its patrons merging into one inhuman sound. He knew now that there was no leaving, not unless he destroyed the tavern completely. Behind him, Lydia's voice echoed softly, almost tenderly. "Run if you must. The curse always brings them back." The traveler sat alone in the dim light of his candle, tracing the strange symbols he had copied from the cellar walls. Every curve, every line pulsed faintly, as if alive. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what he was about to attempt. Somewhere above him, the sound of laughter echoed, the same hollow laughter that filled the tavern every night. He could feel their eyes on him even when he was alone. The sisters were always watching. Every flicker of shadow felt like their breath against his neck. He began piecing together what he had learned. The curse was not endless. It fed on memory and repetition. Each vanished soul became trapped in an endless cycle of their final night, replayed over and over. But there was one clue hidden in the old journal, a reference to the mirror between worlds. It suggested that the sisters' power was rooted not only in the tavern, but in their reflection, the illusion of control sustained by their own image. If the mirror could be destroyed, perhaps their dominion would shatter too. The traveler moved through the corridors at night, silent and deliberate. The tavern was asleep, but the building itself breathed. Every step he took echoed unnaturally, as if the floorboards were warning him to stop. He slipped past the empty rooms where patrons once stayed. Their belongings remained, coats still hanging, candles half burned, even beds still indented as if someone had just left. It was a mausoleum disguised as a home. He dared not look too long at anything for fear it might look back. Downstairs, Lydia polished glasses behind the bar, her humming low and dissonant. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her eyes glinting like polished stones. The traveler froze, pretending to fix his coat. "Can't sleep?" Lydia asked sweetly. He forced a smile. "Just restless," he muttered. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "Restless ones don't last long here." Her voice lingered like poison in the air. He retreated before she could question more, the sound of her laughter chasing him up the stairs. He returned to his room and began preparing. He had stolen a piece of the strange chalk used for the cellar symbols and drew protective marks across the door and window. The journal mentioned that words of the old tongue could weaken their grasp for a short time. He practiced the phrases quietly, each syllable burning in his throat. He wasn't sure if they would work, but doing nothing meant certain doom. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the glass like a living thing. That night, the tavern grew louder than ever. The music twisted into chaos, the violin shrieking like a wailing spirit. Patrons laughed and screamed, their movements erratic, mechanical. The traveler crept downstairs, following the sound of clinking glass to the back hall. There, behind a locked door, he saw it, a massive ornate mirror covered with symbols that pulsed faintly like veins. The reflection showed not the room behind him, but a black void swirling with faint shapes, faces, reaching hands, eyes, the souls of the lost. He reached for the mirror, but the air turned freezing cold. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. "You shouldn't be here," a voice whispered, Margaret's, low and sharp. He turned slowly to see her standing in the shadows, her figure almost translucent, her eyes gleaming with unnatural light. "You can't save them," she said. "They don't want saving. They belong here now." Her tone was calm, almost pitying, but the traveler saw the fear flicker for just a moment when he looked back at the mirror. That was his chance. He lunged toward the frame, clutching the shard of glass he had kept from the cellar. With all his strength, he struck the center of the mirror. It cracked, not like glass, but like bone. A scream erupted from within, not from one throat, but from hundreds. The tavern shuddered violently, the lights extinguishing at once. From somewhere deep below, a roar echoed, as if the earth itself was waking. The traveler fell backward as shards of glass rained down, each one reflecting faces he had never seen before, faces of the lost, now free or doomed forever. The traveler stands before the bar, trembling hands gripping the final cup. The liquid inside gleams unnaturally, swirling like smoke trapped in glass. The sisters watch from the shadows, their smiles both inviting and cruel. Every whisper, every faint heartbeat in the room feels amplified. The traveler knows that this drink is the key, the essence of their dark power. One sip could reveal everything, or end everything. Outside, the wind howls like a warning, urging them to choose wisely. The tavern begins to change. The walls breathe, expanding and contracting as if alive. The portraits of long-lost patrons shift their gaze, watching in silent agony. Beneath the traveler's feet, faint cries echo from beneath the floorboards, pleading for release. The sisters step closer, their footsteps soundless. "It's your turn," one of them murmurs, voice like honey and poison mixed. The traveler tightens their grip on the cup, unsure whether to drink or destroy it. A sudden vision floods their mind. Dozens of souls, suspended in a fog-like dimension, their faces distorted in despair. They see themselves among them, a warning of what awaits those who surrender. The traveler's pulse quickens. The cellar symbols flash in their memory. There was one that reversed the sisters' ritual. If only they could recall it precisely. The air thickens as the tavern's clock strikes midnight, signaling the moment of decision. The traveler throws the cup to the ground. The liquid bursts into flames that burn cold, spreading like frostfire. The sisters scream, not in pain, but in fury. Shadows twist violently, the building groaning as their connection to the curse begins to unravel. Bottles explode, releasing clouds of smoke that carry trapped whispers into the air. The traveler grabs a fallen candle and traces the reversal symbol on the wooden floor, chanting the words they barely remember. The flames grow brighter, consuming everything. The tavern shakes violently, shelves collapsing, windows cracking under invisible pressure. The sisters advance, their faces contorted with rage and desperation. "You think you can end what was begun centuries ago," one hisses. The traveler doesn't answer. They pour the rest of the cursed liquid into the fire. The sound that follows is not a scream, but the roar of the entire building's soul awakening. Light bursts through the roof, illuminating the entire town for the first time in decades. The spirits imprisoned in the tavern begin to fade, finally set free. The traveler collapses, gasping for air as the room disintegrates around them. The sisters' forms flicker, their silhouettes dissolving into ash. For a moment, silence reigns. Then, with a low groan, the tavern falls into ruin, leaving nothing but the scent of burned wood and old memories. When dawn arrives, the traveler awakens in the forest nearby. The tavern is gone, replaced by a blackened crater. Locals who come to investigate claim they've never seen such destruction. Yet in the ashes, they find one thing untouched: a single unbroken cup sitting perfectly still. Its surface gleams faintly, reflecting faces that aren't there. The traveler, haunted by what they've seen, leaves the town and vows never to return. Years later, the tavern is rebuilt. No one remembers who constructed it or how it reopened. The same name returns to its sign, as if time itself had restored the curse. Patrons enter, drink, and sometimes vanish. Behind the counter, two familiar figures serve with gentle smiles. The sisters live on, eternal and unchanged. And somewhere far away, the traveler dreams of that final night, of the last cup, still waiting for the next soul to take a sip.